Welcome to School's Out with Sam Sorbo, a series about education. What you don't know, what you should know, and what to do about it. Last week, we spent a good deal of time revamping our assumptions about curricula. I hope you are starting to reconsider some of your core understandings about education and its goals. This week, we will tackle the definitions of teacher and teaching. What is teaching, and what makes an effective teacher? To answer that, because teaching is a transitive verb, meaning it transfers action from one thing to another, let's start by asking what the end result of to teach ought to be. We teach children in an effort to give them a good education. What is the desired product of a good education? Well, rather than just say, get into a good college or get a good job, I propose a new definition. An ability to learn anything the student sets his or her mind and heart on. That would include a fearlessness about learning that our current system seems determined against. Instead, it seems to stoke a reluctance to learn new things, even a fearfulness or distaste for learning in general, because it makes learning, well, institutional, competitive, and challenging. Second, a good education would be marked by the cultivation of an inextinguishable curiosity. Children begin life insatiably curious. Well, what happens to that? The institution destroys it. Finally, I like to think of education as the solidification for the student of who he or she is in the world. How the student defines herself and the world around her ought to be an end result of a good education. For instance, an ability to learn anything, a cultivation of interest and self-determination. So, what are we hoping for from our teachers? Teachers should be people who pour into children, not simply imparting knowledge, but also molding character, helping with social skills, honing children's virtue, right? And getting them fired up about learning. And wait, how are they to do that in a classroom full of unruly fifth graders? I'll tell you how they will start. Roll call and rules. Are we expecting too much from our teachers? Their unions seem to think so. Teachers are considered underpaid and overworked despite summers off and generous benefits. Tasked with working in large classrooms and responsible for children's test performances that seem to keep getting worse each year, maybe the task of teaching is just too daunting, even for teachers. Just because we want something doesn't mean it's possible. Maybe we need to manage our expectations of teachers. Just look at what we see emanating from our high schools and university programs, and, well, you see young people who know very little, can't learn, aren't curious, and are even confused as to their own gender. Something just a few years ago, the entire world took for granted as completely obvious. I need to add a disclaimer right up front to this discussion. I love teachers. I love to teach, and I understand the desire some people have to seek that as fulfillment to a dream. I admire their dedication, and we absolutely need people like this in our society. So what I'm about to impart may seem to fly in the face of that, but trust me, my criticism is of the system that we call education and not of the teachers themselves. Well, they haven't perverted the meaning of the word teacher. The system has. They, by and large, are working in a bureaucracy that demands from them something altogether different than what the verb to teach really means. They are pawns in a game of chess, ready to be sacrificed, if need be, for the king, in this case, the bureaucracy, to prevail. I had a friend at Duke University who studied history. In other words, he majored in pre-unemployment. And upon graduation, he decided to enter teaching because he loved history so much and he wanted to share that love with young people. He was a big teddy bear of a guy too. So I could already picture him mentoring junior high schoolers. Of course, being a young teacher, new to the game, so to speak, when he went back to New Jersey, he was low man on the totem pole in the teaching bracket. They assigned him the worst school, the worst teaching assignment, the one that no one else wanted. As a completely novice teacher, his bright-eyed, bushy-tailed demeanor quickly shifted to, self-preservation, as his life was threatened twice before Christmas of his first year at that school. One and done, as they say. It took 1 year for him to realize teaching was not for him. And yet, he hadn't lost the passion for the material. He had simply been exposed to the real workings of the system, which is behavior modification. And he failed at that. He couldn't keep the kids in line. So he failed out. And the education system lost a passionate advocate for the true teaching learning paradigm. You see where I'm going with this? If our teachers are distracted, not simply by roll call and endless ministerial duties, but by behavior modification demands of teaching children to line up, not to speak out of turn, and disciplining them when they do cause disruptions, how much time is left for teaching and how much energy is left for a passion fueling that desire? Now, add to all of this the new criteria for teachers, the training in critical race theory and inclusivity for gender questioning students, the new standards of Common Core and the new version of history called the 1619 Project. Well, even a basic understanding of chemistry informs us that the more one dilutes a solution, the weaker it gets. If you love a cold glass of milk and I give you milk that's diluted with 10 parts water, not yummy, right? And then I put a teeny little bit of poop in the water. And I tell you, you must drink it. Yes, I said poop. This is a G-rated show after all. But I mean the stuff that a teacher might disagree with. What are you going to do if you are asked to teach history, for instance, and now that includes the 1619 Project, but you disagree with it because it's already been completely debunked by actual historians? What does a good teacher do then? The poor professor must either quit or compromise his morals, right? How does that affect his teaching? I'll leave you to surmise that, but suffice it to say that teaching something you don't believe, well, that certainly wouldn't lead to effective job performance. Slowly, teaching becomes more about punching a time clock and less about passion. And that's not me just saying it, that's the system imposing this paradigm on teachers. When I was an aspiring actress in Hollywood, I did a lot of auditions. Now, for a typical audition, you'd get sides, a few pages of script with your lines, a scene or two or three. And you'd memorize your lines, maybe an hour or two of preparation. And then you'd do hair and makeup and dress. You rehearse a bit, you prepare, you drive to the audition, you wait sometimes hours to see the casting director. You walk into the room, you do the scene for either a camera or a group of people under typically inadequate conditions and leave, hoping against hope that You might hear back some good news in the coming days. On average, it took 3 auditions to land a job, but oh, how you wanted to get that job. Any job. Once you got the job, you show up to set, having memorized your lines, ready to work. There's a reason the standard line on set is, "Hurry up and wait." There's a lot of downtime for actors on sets. Well, for most everyone, really. The people who work the hardest are often the director who is working the entire day to see his vision come to life, and the DP, or director of photography. But for the actor, it's hair and makeup, costuming, and waiting until you get to act. So when people would ask me if I liked being an actress, I would answer yes, about 5% of the time. Because even a successful actor really only gets to act about 5% of his entire schedule, and the rest of the time is spent on the minutiae surrounding that 5% spent in character, bringing a story to life. Now, that isn't to say the rest of it can't be fun. Getting your hair and makeup done, chatting with folks on set, or traveling to great locations. But that isn't acting, right? It's the same for teaching, only probably worse, because the rest of it isn't nearly that kind of fun. The rest of it, in many cases, is a distraction. I recently took a plane ride with a gentleman who told me his wife taught kindergarten to classes of about 15 kids, and a third of them didn't speak English. That meant that when she said, "Sit down," maybe 5 of them wouldn't. Of course, there were other instructions that got lost in translation too. She was frustrated that so much of her time was spent mitigating for the children who didn't conform with the rest of the crew. That's because learning is very difficult to portion out to individuals who are substantially dissimilar from each other. But behavior modification is necessary in order to conform the children to a standard that one can then school. We continued our conversation on the plane with the question of, what is education? His answer was eventually a standard of knowledge, but he was very quick to say that this standard was too difficult to achieve, that many of, for instance, inner city schools fail to accomplish it, admitting that he thought it really is quite hopeless. And so his argument for public school focused back onto socialization, which for him devolved back to the argument of the children who failed to sit when asked because they didn't understand English. Where else would they learn that? Anywhere else. Literally, anywhere else. And that's not the proposed purpose of our schools. It may be the default purpose, but that's not where our purpose is or should be. And, stay with me now, if the goal of the school system is now socialization, what does that make a teacher? What is the teacher's job now? Referee? Disciplinarian? Friendship coach? Well, the paradigm is that the teacher lectures to the class. The class learns by taking notes and answering questions and taking tests to prove their knowledge. The standard is that the teacher knows everything the student should learn, and the teacher is the only source of that information, the gatekeeper, the final arbiter of information. So the struggle comes from that model because we learn from it that knowledge is given, not gotten. It's passive, not active. It's doled out instead of hunted down. And it's limited because in order to get some knowledge, you must find a teacher who will then give it to you. Think about that. When you need to learn something new, do you tend to think, I wish I had someone to show that to me. Well, perhaps intrinsically you already know the need for a teacher is a feint. It can't be absolutely necessary. After all, there's Google and DuckDuckGo. But for school, no, that takes a credentialed professional for third grade addition and subtraction. No, that takes a devoted student of education who went to college to learn how to teach. For reading time? Not your average adult can pick the correct books and read them properly to a group of children in just the right way. And your alphabet? Oh, that's an adult alphabet. You can't teach that to a child. Only after years of study can you impart your own knowledge to your offspring. Not everyone can do school attendance and disciplinary records. That takes special training. You're unqualified. In fact, it's a wonder the government allows you to keep your kids living with you at all. The people we are calling teachers are not performing the job we consider to be teaching. I'm sorry to say that, but my evidence is pretty solid. After all, we are accepting now a 38% test result as proficient. That's not evidence of teaching, it's cheating. In Oregon, the governor just signed a bill that children were allowed to graduate without being able to write or do math. What was that you were saying about what children need to be learning? So nothing against teachers, but the very concept that knowledge might only be parsed out by a certified authority under special contract is absurd, especially when it's simply common knowledge, like all of grade school and most of middle school. With all the information in textbooks and online, why do we need credentialed teacher in an institution? Why, Sam, obviously to keep the class in line. Okay. That's behavior modification. That's not teaching. The school teaching paradigm is limiting because it forces us to think of learning as happening in a controlled environment and available only from an authority. Like the handle on a faucet, the teacher determines the flow, the strength, and the temperature of the stream of knowledge. This is a dangerous setup, especially for impressionable children, especially when it's so obviously a lie. The truth is quite the opposite. Learning happens anywhere at any time and is governed entirely by the student. Answers to their questions and curiosity are readily available, no gatekeeper necessary, and the child only has to be shown how and where to search for it. By you. Showing your child how to find information actually makes you, in a sense, his tutor, but he is still his own best teacher, which takes the pressure off of you. That's why we call it self-teaching. Unfortunately, this does make teachers somewhat superfluous, because to raise freedom-loving free thinkers, we shouldn't want teachers to serve as the spigots to knowledge. Teachers might be awesome, and many are, but the teacher is, in a sense, an impediment to true education. That sounds pretty harsh. Let me explain. The teacher regulates the flow and delivery of information, wresting the control of learning from the student. Our working definition of a good education is a strong sense of competency, curiosity, and character. By limiting the flow of information and systematizing it, the teacher forces the student into the teacher's paradigm of learning, making it less organic and less fun, especially for the inquisitive student. You've got questions? Don't disrupt the class. That suppresses the curiosity of the student rather than stoking it. As for character, just make sure you toe the line. Don't stand out, conform to the will of the authority, or suffer ridicule or worse. And for true character, remember that teachers are forbidden from teaching traditional morals. You know, the kind that come only from the Bible, or the moral capital inspired by the Bible. They must teach survival of the fittest, which, when you boil it down, really is just bullying to get what you want. In other words, entitlement. Now think back to your school days, to your favorite teacher or teachers. What qualifications made them the best? Was it simply the material? Was it just that they gave you candy? Was it how fun they were in class? Or was it the personal interest they took in you? Was it the relationship you developed with them that made you feel special? Putting your child into an institution and hoping that a teacher might single them out to make him or her feel like he matters in the system is gambling with your child's psyche. Here's the main point in this exploration of the definition of teacher and teaching. Unless you want to be lectured to, and most of us don't, teachers and the scholastic classroom paradigm is not the best place for learning. It's not the best plan. A student in this setting will likely become addicted to expect all information and only that information, instead of finding things out for himself, and that includes learning to think for himself. It produces weakness of mind rather than strength of mind. A student who is the recipient of pre-digested food will lose all his teeth because he never needs or learns how to chew. Then he'll be crippled by the notion that in order to do something, he needs a teacher to show him how to do it. Right? Isn't that why you are watching this show, in fact? To be shown how to do self-teaching with your child? Do you remember the cafeteria at your school growing up? Did you have a wonderful, kind lunch lady or a cranky one who dolloped out mashed potatoes with a grimace and wonder what she put in them? Did you ever go out to eat with the family and thought it was a special thing, or even just a nice dinner at home? Let me ask you a question. Which did you prefer? Which is better, cafeteria food or a la carte? And just to make it more difficult, I'm not talking 21 or Maxime's, okay? Let's say ordering off the menu at Denny's or IHOP. And stay with me here. So, which is it? Cafeteria or the corner diner? Most people would still say a la carte, right? Because we like to have things our way, especially if you have any peculiarities like food allergies or you're restricting your carbs. So, think of the government school system like a cafeteria. Everybody lines up, grabs a tray, everyone gets the same servings of each thing, and no complaining. Every teacher is a lunch lady, keeping kids in line, doling out green beans the same as everyone else gets, regardless of the child's appetite. Shouldn't good parents prefer to order off the menu for their kids' education? On next week's episode of School's Out with Sam Sorbo, we'll delve into the greatest challenge parents think they must solve, the question of socialization. Be sure to tune in so I can assure you your child won't turn out freakish and antisocial, at least not because she's self-taught anyway. Hey, it could just be in the gene pool. Thanks for joining me for another episode of School's Out with Sam Sorbo.